Hey folks, thank you for hanging out this evening for a whole new episode of Casually Christian presented by Livestream My Event. If this is your first time hanging out with us here in Casually Christian, we talk about people's lives, their interests, and their passions. If you like what you hear, please remember to like, follow, and subscribe, and smash that notification bell to catch the latest episodes of Casually Christian. Well, today, folks, we talk about people's lives and their interests and passions, and today I'm going to bring somebody who fits all those requirements, man. Like I met him a few years ago at a networking event. He's a writer, filmmaker. He also has his own podcast, and he also publishes his own comic books as well. Well, folks, without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you guys Scott El Diablo Marcano. Scott, I really appreciate you guys hanging out with us, for a little bit here at Casually Christian. I really appreciate it, man. Oh, can you say that again? Like you weren't coming in.
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Man, how was the Comic-Con, man? I saw that you were going over there, and I know they've been shut down for like a couple years. Is this the first time returning back to Comic-Con, or were you there like the previous year?
I've been there. I've been at Comic-Con and had a booth for my comic book company since like 2007. So I've been there for a long time. And yeah, we were on a hiatus for 3 years because of COVID. Now, the other shows across the country, I do shows all across North America, and I also do shows in Canada occasionally. And all the other shows, in the South, and in Texas, in the Midwest, they all started up like a year and a half ago. But Comic-Con, because California is, a lot more COVID aware, they really hadn't started, till finally this year they put it back online, and we all came in. And it was a fantastic show, I must say. We did better as a company that we've ever done. We had our highest, numbers we've ever had at Comic-Con. So it was, I'm not complaining. There's a lot of pent-up geek energy, I think, going on at Comic-Con.
I think because the energy was there. People were they wanted to see stuff, they wanted to buy stuff. Because it's been a while over here in California that the cons haven't been, we're barely getting them back, and just that wave of excitement, and that's, what's different now going to Comic-Con than it was before COVID? Is there a difference, or is it kind of like business as usual?
There's the obvious difference that you're wearing a mask. It was a requirement at Comic-Con, that you had to wear a mask and that everybody there wear a mask, which is a smart thing, because I'll just take it as an aside. I did Phoenix a few months prior. I did Phoenix in May, and my daughter came with me, and because she's a teenager, it was not a requirement at Phoenix that anyone wear a mask. Now I wore a mask because I just I have boosters and all that stuff, but I'm just kind of like, there's a lot of people here.
Yeah, you just never know, and you're like, people are just coming in.
Yeah, exactly. And they're at your booth and they're checking out your stuff and talking to you. So they're right there, and you get in big crowds where it's very crowded. So I wore a mask, but my daughter was like, nah, I'm not gonna wear a mask. And sure enough, she got COVID after the show, and I didn't. I was totally COVID free. So now she's a believer, and she wore her mask. She was out with me, her and her boyfriend came with me to Comic-Con, and yeah, they wore masks in the hall. So that part of it's a little different. I think the energy though is still the same. I don't think wearing masks or anything like that inhibited anybody from having fun or cosplaying. Some people were really inventive, and they worked their mask into their cosplay. Like they would be Groot, but they would have a Groot mask, or they would be like, they would be like, like Deadpool, but they had a very specific Deadpool mask over their face. So people made it work. And so, that was the major thing. I think other than that, it was like good old Comic-Con. I mean, there was a few people who had dropped out, who weren't fucking near me in their booths because they had not, Comic-Con allowed you to roll over your booth until the pandemic ended, or until they started the show. Yeah. And for whatever reason, some people just didn't do that. I don't know why you'd give up your space at Comic-Con, but they did. And so there were a couple of new faces there, and I was like, okay, well, all right.
Well, that's excellent, man. I mean, let's start from the beginning. What got you into the whole being a writer, the entertainment industry, being a comic book creator? I know you just before we started the show that you say that you went to NYU. Is that where it started to happen, or what were your influences?
Well, I've always been I think I've always, been a storyteller. I mean, it started when I was a kid, in high school, and in junior high, I used to tell a lot of stories. That's how I got my nickname. I used to tell a lot of ghost stories, and I knew the whole story of The Exorcist, the real story. I'd done research because I was so terrified by that movie, but yet obsessed with it and ghosts in general. I once lived in a haunted house when I was a kid, and it really freaked me out. So I became obsessed with ghosts. I'd always tell ghosts to my friends, and so they started calling me the Devil Boy. And over time that morphed into Diablo, and then eventually that became Diablo Comics later on. But my first, when I was first in college, I knew I wanted to be a storyteller because I was always really good at telling stories and entertaining people with stories. And I was making my own little stupid comics in high school. I draw them on notebook paper, and I was too dumb to figure out there was a thing called a Xerox machine. So I draw each comic by hand and try to copy what I did on the previous comic, and then I put a piece of gum in it, and I sell it to my friends, and I think they just took pity on me, so they get an order for the comic, and that's how I kind of got started. But the comic books kind of dropped out when I was in college. At first I didn't know what I wanted to do in college. I liked history, I liked philosophy, I loved politics, but then I realized somebody came up to me and started talking to me about filmmaking in NYU, and I realized that's probably what I really should be doing. So I transferred from UC Santa Cruz, where I was first going to college, to NYU to School of the Arts, and I studied filmmaking there. And after I graduated from there, I traveled for a while in South America, but then I got accepted to USC Film School of Cinema and Television, and I got into the graduate program there. And so I did more film studies there. And while I was at USC, I was lucky enough to sell a script to MGM. So in my final semester of graduate school, I asked my professors, I said, should I stay? And they're like, why? You're already in the industry. Nobody cares. You just sold a script, so just leave. So I did. So I left, and I became a full-time writer after that. And I didn't really get into comics for a little while. I was actually, just writing regular screenplays, studio things, independents. And then I had a couple scripts laying around that nobody seemed to like, but I thought were great. And one of them was this horror thing that's actually behind me, the Unwanted. Yeah. And so I said, what would be really cool, if I could turn that maybe into a comic book, since no producers were really jumping for it. Yeah. So I kind of just fooled around. I found somebody who would illustrate like some of the pages of it, and they did. I had no ambition to really start a company. I just wanted to start a single issue to see if it could work. It was just the first 10 pages of the screenplay. And I got a table at Comic-Con. This is back in the days when you could actually get a table. It wasn't that big of a deal. Yeah. And I got my little table. I had that one issue sitting on the table and a bunch of business cards. And this guy from Diamond, who's the biggest distributor in the U.S., came up and was thumbing through it. And I didn't know he worked for Diamond. And this guy's thumbing through it. He's like, he goes, have you ever thought about taking this national? And I was like, oh yeah, but those guys at Diamond would never accept it. It's this one little issue. It's silly. I think I handed me his card. He was the head of distribution for Diamond. He's like,
crazy.
Oh, and so I did, and he told me to finish it and make it a graphic novel, and I did. And then Diamond took it out. It sold incredibly well.
That's excellent.
So then I was like, great, and I was able to basically take the money from that and money from film, and then I was actually able to find investors in a bunch of different comic ideas I had. So I was able to form Diablo Comics, and so that became another thing that I do in addition to my screenwriting work.
That's really awesome, man. Like, and you know what? I checked out your podcast, and I checked out the last podcast you did, the Only Locals, and the way you were telling that story was very like, you're a good storyteller. Like, it's like, wow, nice. It really, like, it was so visual about like, you lived in Malibu and you had like a gang and you know what I mean? And it was just like the way you were like reading it, it was like like listening to an audiobook. I was at work. I work remote and I was listening to podcast stuff. Like, I was like really into it. It's like, wow, this is really paints a picture. But yeah, like, is that where you grew up, man? Like in Malibu, like, or you were just there for a little bit?
This sounds really stupid. Yeah, I grew up in the slums of Malibu.
That's a movie title, man. Slums of Malibu.
There you go. Yeah. But as I say in that particular story, people have this impression that Malibu it's just movie stars and rich people, but it really wasn't like that. I mean, when I was growing up there, at least, there were a lot of middle class and just regular working class families who lived there. And my mom was one of them. She was a physical therapist, and we had a little house. It was totally cool. But it was off, it wasn't on the beach. It was up on the bluffs. And so, most of the people I hung out with were scrappy families and kids who who just wanted to get out of LA and lived out there. So it was kind of a scrappy area to live. There was a few kids who were really rich. I mean, the Sean Penn and Chris Penn, lived on, Point Dump, and I had some mutual friends with them. And Dean Cain was one of my big friends growing up. We played football together. So
that's pretty sick.
Yeah, Rob Lowe was, but he wasn't famous then. He was just Rob, And the most famous guy we knew, really, because the Penns weren't famous either at that point. I mean, their dad was a producer, but we didn't know that. We were like, oh, okay, whatever, it's the Penns. But the biggest guy who was sort of famous was Charlie Sheen, and he went by Charlie Estevez in those days.
Yeah.
And his brother Emilio, and they were our peers. My brother was good friends with Charlie, and he was just regular Charlie, and we used to bug him all the time, say, "Oh, you gotta go on acting, like your dad." And he would insist, "No, I'm Charlie Estevez. I'm never gonna act. That's all BS." And then,
so nuts.
It went a different way. He was really mellow. By the way, the most mellow guy in high school and junior high. You would never guess the wild, crazy guy he turned into. And, so
that's total contrast, man.
I don't want to share all my
oh, please do tell.
The some I really shouldn't share, but he's an interesting guy.
And you also mentioned that that you know Vince Gilligan, the creator of Breaking Bad, because you live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. That's really cool, man. That's really neat.
Vince was my buddy at NYU. Him and Tom Schnauz, who's the executive producer on Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. I was actually roommates with Tom, and Tom was also roommates. Tom was roommates with Vince when we were at NYU, and then after we graduated, there was a year before I started graduate school, and me and Tom were roommates in Brooklyn, and Vince was kind of hovering around too. Well, and Vince sold a script early on. He was the first one of us to really make it. He sold a script called Wilder Napalm. And so he moved out to LA, but he stayed in touch with Tom, and I like Vince. I didn't hang out with him constantly, but we did talk. I messed up his senior project. And I asked him once, are you pissed about it? It's a funny story. He was trying to do this. He was trying to do this thing at NYU about this guy. It was done live in studio where this kid had built this Eiffel Tower out of toothpicks. And Vince, I don't know how long he spent. He actually built the Eiffel Tower out of toothpicks. And at the end of this comedy skit, this guy was supposed to drop this book on it and destroy it. But it was live, and you couldn't blow it. It was for his project in the studio. And I was on camera, and Vince kept telling me over and over again, "Scott, I want this really slow zoom out. It has to be perfect without a jiggle, because if you blow it, it's one take. We can't stop." And I was doing it. We practiced. I swear I practiced it for 2 hours. I didn't want to let Vince down. He was my friend. And as we're pulling out, I guess I got so nervous that my hands started perspiring on the control of the camera. And so I actually zoomed out really fast. He didn't notice it live. And then the guy destroyed the Apple Tower with the book. And at the end, he's like, "Let me look at it." And Vince's face was like,
defeated.
Still got an A, so he can't be that bitter about it. But,
well, you can't, man. He has, he's mean. Breaking Bad is pretty. I don't know if Better Call Saul is pretty so fucking good, man. I don't know if you've been watching Better Call Saul, just the storytelling of it, the character arcs. It was just fucking great, man. And it's just so awesome that you know these people, and actually, I know that you wrote your own Biodome. How did you get it? How did he get the opportunity to write that script?
That was it almost just fell in my lap. I was at USC Film School, and I was working on my senior thesis there. They used to have this thing called the 480 Project, where the school would fund a 30-minute film for you. And I actually won. Only 5 people got it per semester, and I got it. And I was very involved in that, freaking out, trying to make sure I did it right, because that was kind of my final big project. And my roommate at the time, I always have good roommates. My roommate at the time was Rich Wilkes, who would later, and he had just sold Airheads. With Brendan Fraser. So he was very busy with that. He was getting paid a lot of money because he was writing studio stuff. And he turned to me one day when we were hanging out in the apartment. And he said, "Hey, Scott, these guys at 20th Century Fox, these producers I know, they have this little idea they want to do. They're only offering $600. It's way beneath me at this point. I'm moving out of the apartment. I got these big deals." He said, "You want to do it?" And I'd never written a screenplay before at that point. I was purely a directing student. So I said, "Oh, sure, yeah, $600 seemed like pizza money." I was like, "Oh, yeah, it's a lot of money." Okay. What did I know? So I met the guys at 20th Century Fox, and they were thrilled that anybody would write their project, for $600, and Rich gave me a good recommendation. So for $600, I recruited another classmate of mine, a guy named Kip Koenig, who would later go on to become a producer on Grey's Anatomy. And we just banged it out for these guys. It was just kind of like, oh, let's just make each other laugh. And the idea was, two idiots stuck in the biodome. I think the original pitch was Beavis and Butthead get stuck in the biosphere. And, I thought, I was like, okay, this sounds funny. It has some environmental leanings. So it started off with us just writing a treatment. They loved the treatment. And then me and Kip just wrote the script. We banged it out, the original draft, like in maybe a month. And it was just us sitting around in my apartment, just making each other laugh, writing these scenes.
Wow.
And we gave it to those guys. They loved it. It happened actually a lot faster than I thought. It only took about a year. 20th Century Fox rejected it. They kept shopping it around. They took it to this agency where they were represented. They were represented by Tom Strickler, who was actually at ICM at the time. And Tom Strickler was the biggest agent in Hollywood at the time. Shane Black was his client, and he had sold, what was it? The Long Goodbye? I think was the name of the script for $4 million for Shane Black. So he was a huge agent, and he read Biodome, and he literally told them, "This is total crap. It'll never be made." There's a payoff to this story. It's funny. So he told them that. I asked if I could speak to him on the phone, and they said, "Tom doesn't want to talk to you. He's done with you." So they kept shopping it around, though. They believed in it, and they eventually got it to Brad Cavoy over at Motion Picture Corp of America. And Brad had just done Dumb and Dumber, and he read it, and he thought it was hilarious. He loved it. So he took it to MGM, and MGM said, "Sure, but you got to get some cast." So they went to Pauly Shore. Pauly Shore said he would do it. He thought it was a great idea, and they convinced Stephen Baldwin to do it as well. And the next thing I know, I get this call, and I'm like, "Hello, who is it?" And it's Tom Strickler on the phone, and he's like, "Scott, I'm your agent." And I'm like, "Wait, you're the guy who said this was the biggest pile of crap you did?" And he's like, "I never said that. How dare you say I never said anything?" He started screaming at me, and he sorry, that's my dog. He literally said he was going to castrate me if I signed with another agent. He was a good salesman. That convinced me. I don't want to be castrated by Tom Strickler. So I agreed to sign with him at the time, and he became my agent for the next 4 years. And it ended up working out okay with him for a while. He's a pretty intense guy. He's not an agent anymore. He started, Endeavor with Ari Emanuel. And Ari's like Ari Gold on Entourage is basically Ari Emanuel. That's how he acts. Tom Strickler did not act that much different. They were two peas in a pod, and they started each other. And I got a call one day too. You were at ICM with these guys, and right when Biodome was about to come out, I get this call. I actually opened up, the paper in the morning, and there's this whole scandal that Tom basically has started a whole agency and taken all his clients out of ICM in the middle of the night, out in the parking lot with his files, running out of the building. And I was like, "What?" And next thing I know, he's calling me. I was like, "Yeah, now you're a client of my new agency." And I'm like,
"That's wild, man. Only in Hollywood, right?"
It was crazy. And so I ended up as a client of Endeavor. This was before they merged with William Morris. So that's how I ended up with Tom Strickler. I ended up at Endeavor. It wasn't Endeavor William Morris at the time. It was just Endeavor. That's how I ended up being an Endeavor. And, Biodome went out, and we sold a bunch of other stuff to Disney and a bunch of other places. So that's kind of how I got my boost. But it's kind of just, luck. I mean, I got to say, if Rich hadn't thrown me that project, because it just didn't pay a lot, and he didn't really want to do it. That was my first break, and I was really lucky to get that, because a lot of people don't, and specs don't sell like that anymore quite the same way. It was kind of the Wild West in the early 90s where you could really walk in a room, just say something. You've never sold a script. Arnold Schwarzenegger is a preschool teacher, and they're paying you $1 million, whether you've written the script or not. That's how Kindergarten Cop was basically sold. Yeah. And things like that were happening all the time. It was kind of a wild time. Nowadays, everything is, it's got to be a tentpole. It's got to be a big franchise and a huge IP that everybody knows about. But in those days, you could just pitch a crazy idea, and people would pour money on you. Yeah, they buy it.
I mean, I totally know what you're talking about, because I read something like that too, where movies like Drop Dead Fred and Kindergarten Cop, they were taking chances on these oddball movies. And now it's all about the Marvel, the popular IPs. You don't really see those type of quirky comedies anymore, which is kind of sucks. I mean, it's there, but you don't see them as advertised as a major motion studio. You know what I mean? You don't see the trailers.
The business model has changed so much, in the last 20 years. So that nowadays studios are very risk adverse. They're much more. You much less these characters who just like Brad Cavoy, it's crazy people who make a lot of money, who just jump in there and just take chances and do crazy things. Nowadays, it's very corporate. It's very thought out.
Yeah.
Everybody who's doing it has got an MBA, and they're just very cautious. And in a way, I can understand why they do that, because if you have the Lord of the Rings or you have the Star Wars franchise, you're looking at a big audience. You're going to make you're going to have to make it for 100 million, but you'll make $1 billion, right? So that's why they proceed in that way. So the idea of taking a chance and rolling the dice on an unknown property, an original idea, they've become very they don't want to do that as much because they don't see it as guaranteed money. Now, funny enough, the numbers on what makes money has not changed. 7 out of 10 movies will fail. The 8th one will break even, and 9 in 10 will make a fortune. That has not changed. It doesn't matter how big the IP is or how cautious and perfect they are. It's the same success rate, but they believe they're doing it a better way. Whether or not that's reality, that's what they believe. So they don't buy as many specs. They don't buy pitches like they used to. They want to buy huge things that they think are out there, and not just little things. Because I know this from Comic-Con. A couple of years ago at Comic-Con, you could have a weird little independent comic on your table, and producers would be there all day long at Comic-Con asking you about it. The last 7 years of Comic-Con, nothing. Because their attitude is, if we haven't heard about it and it hasn't come from DC or Marvel, forget it. It's not big enough for us.
Mm-hmm.
Which is an interest, again, it's affected that too. Because they used to go to Comic-Con and practically everybody, including me, had optioned their books, to somebody. But now they just I think Kick-Ass was the last sort of smaller thing that really came from nowhere. But it's interesting to note, Walking Dead was nothing when it first started. It was a comic that didn't sell. Yeah. It was going out to the end of its run. They were going to just continue it, and somebody took a chance on it, and it became one of the biggest TV shows of all time.
What studio right now, in your opinion, is making that the original content? Is there a studio in your opinion that that they're living up to what a studio should be doing in creating original stuff?
I don't think any of the big traditional studios are really like that anymore. I would say one is better than the other. Occasionally things get slipped through, like Bob Simons years ago. Bob Simons produced Airheads. He produced Problem Child and all the Adam Sandler movies. Bob loves comedy, and a couple of years ago he got on this kick, and I believe he got Paramount to. I might be wrong about this. It was either Paramount or Universal. He got them to agree to let's do a bunch of $30 million movies, like we used to do, not the 100 million, but the 30 million.
Yeah.
And let's try to get that going again, and mainly comedies. But he kind of failed at. I think Sex Tape was their big sort of attempt to really relight that flame, and Sex Tape didn't make that much money, so they kind of. Bob kind of got dropped in that. I would say the closest you come to people who are going to do something that's more risky, is really the streaming services. You're really looking at Amazon Studios. You're looking at Apple. Apple does some weird stuff. Netflix does a lot of production, before they start cutting back. Because their model too, they're willing to do smaller things because they're going after viewership and just wanting to get new things out there in front of people. So they'll take much more of a chance on a standalone that's small, within 5 to 10 million, or they'll do a series which is smaller, and they'll take a chance on it, and so I think that's where you see the real chance taking going place. I can't say that Warner Brothers is any more friendly to smaller things than anybody else. I mean, they have their independent divisions. There's Fox, Searchlight, and stuff. There is the indie market, but again, it's you got to show up with you still got to show up with a star or somebody who's very bankable attached. To the project. Otherwise, even on that level, for $1 million or $600,000, they probably will not do it or pick it up.
That's something that's never going to change, right? You got to have somebody who's bankable, like Brad Pitt, or somebody that people are going to pay the tickets to go see the movie.
Or at least it can be a B movie person, but at least if you at least got to be on the IMDb. Under 1,000, at least one of the roles for them to want to finance it. And that's silly because, truth is, you do polls with people will always say, and moviegoers will always come back and say, it's not who's in it. It's whether it's a good movie or whether I'm interested in what it's about. It just so happens that Ethan Hawke isn't it great, but I'm not going to see Ethan Hawke. But the people who finance it think that's the deal. And there is no getting them out of that thinking. You better put Ethan Hawke in some role because he's bankable, at least right now he's bankable.
Yeah.
if you want them to do it. It's very hard to get unknowns in your movie. You can't go that route. Look at, Moonlight, which was produced by Plan B. It was produced by Brad Pitt, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they didn't produce it; they bought it. But the people who made it had nobodies in it, right? It was Michelle Ali was the biggest guy in that movie, and he wasn't that big at the time.
Yeah.
But he wasn't like a household name. But the guys who did, Moonlight were able to get the money to do it as a smaller production, and then later Plan B saw it at like a festival, and Jeremy Kleiner and all those guys picked it up, and then they really pumped it up and won the Academy Award. But that didn't come from a studio doing that. They came from a bunch of really dedicated people who wanted to make that movie, and they got a virtually unknown cast, except for Ali. And again, he wasn't that big at the time, and he was the biggest guy they could get for it. And that film's maybe $1 million. I don't know what their exact budget is, but it looks about $1 million. It's not that big.
I mean, that's the bottom line, is that as long as you have if the story is well written, like well told, like it doesn't matter. Like, yeah, like a famous star could bring more people in, but the bottom line, they want to see a good story that you could empathize with. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I think unless it's a comedy, like, I mean, there's this thing with comedy, you better get somebody funny, and there's only a few people who are really, really funny, to do it, But if you get outside of that, you get to horror, or you get to drama, or you get to action. There's a lot of people who can play those roles, and again, most people will go see the movie not so much because it's giant stars, because they think it's good. I mean, there is that thing of like, especially in his heyday, if Schwarzenegger was in it, you knew it was that kind of action movie. Or with a Western, it's Clint Eastwood. Okay, that makes it more legit than your average Western. There's a little bit of that. I don't want to totally dismiss you put a star in your movie, it's going to do well. But it's much less a factor than I think that people who finance movies think it is. It's kind of a system that feeds on itself. They think they have to please the distributors, because the distributors will say, who's in it? Right? So they're doing that to please the distributors, and the distributors think they're doing that to please the public, because they think, oh, well, I had a movie with nobody in it and nobody wanted to see it. But I don't know. I think they got it. They overemphasize.
They always get it wrong, man.
It's always the script that makes people want to see the movie. It's cool. It's good.
I don't know if you've seen this TV show. It's on Paramount Plus, but it's called The Offer, and it's the way they. It's a story how they made The Godfather, and they had like Robert Evans.
Oh, I heard about that. Yeah.
It's really good. It's so fucking good, man. It's definitely like a show that you want to binge watch. Like, all the episodes are right now available on Paramount Plus, and it's really good, man. Like, the guy who plays Robert Evans, he's like, he should get an Emmy. Like, he did a great job,
I love Robert Evans. I never got a chance to meet him. I saw him once. I saw him in front of Cantor's restaurant in LA when I was this was back in the 2000s. And he was like hanging out with, Ali McGraw, his ex-wife. They were having a really amicable conversation and hugging. And I was totally like, oh, it's on my camera. It's Bob Evans. My idol. I love Bob Evans.
That's
it was hilarious. There's Ali, of course. Where's Steve McQueen to throw something at them? I mean,
I always wanted to meet him, man. I always met people when I was working in Hollywood I met somebody who's met him or has talked to him. Like, I was always like, it's like I heard stories of secondhand. You know what I mean? But it sucks because
he was crazy, but he was a genius too.
Yeah, he's a maverick. And there's not too many producers like that anymore. And do you think this is a different segue? But do you think cancel culture is affecting the way stories are being told right now? Is that even a thing? I mean, I know a lot of conservative people oh, cancel culture, they're ruining movies. Is that do you feel like that's valid, or what the hell are they talking about? What do you think? What do you think that's all about?
Well, I want to get in trouble and offend people. I'm very liberal. I work for Brave New Films for a point, but I do think there is an issue, the cancel culture, and it's not because people literally go around through studios, reading scripts and throwing them out. It's the fear that you will be criticized that drives a lot of it, and some of it is necessary. By the way, films have become more diverse, and including more people is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. I do think to a certain extent, though, and it's not because the studios care. That's the thing that you got to understand. They don't care about being multicultural. They don't care about including LGBTQ plus people in their movies. They don't want to take, pardon my language, they want to take shit about it if they don't do it. It's not sincere. They just want to check the box to say, get off my back.
Yeah.
Because they know if they cast an all-white movie, or they they race swap in the wrong way, they present a stereotype, they're gonna get a lot of shit
chewed
about
out.
it.
Yeah.
So I think that does affect the calculation of how they do it, and you could see it with the Star Wars franchise. You could see a little bit in how they're pursuing the Ring of Power, but I don't think it's the people. I don't think there's, as much as the right will say, there's this Twitter mob that's running around controlling everything, and everybody at the studio is woke. No, they're not woke. They're woke to one thing: money. That's what people on YouTube don't understand. They do these things like, "Oh my God, Captain Marvel's so woke. Are these people, all these liberals running this?" No, it's just people want to make money, and they think that if they don't make it that way, they won't make money. That's really what's happening. Now, that may translate into looking like an agenda, but it's not a conspiracy. It's just a conspiracy of not wanting to have it blowing up on Twitter in the wrong way. That's what's happening. I mean, don't make it. There are some people who do this for hearts are in the right place, and I know a lot of people who produce and fight very hard to get Latinos in movies.
Yeah, they're sincere about it.
They're totally sincere, and they try hard. And I like to think of myself as one of those people. I fought to get an African American actress, in Biodome. There are people who are sincere, and I write scripts that are specifically of people of color as much as I can, because I'm a person who's mixed race. It's important to me. Yeah. But I would say, 70% of the people we're going to say, they don't really truly care. They care about not losing their job. They care about making a lot of money, and as they should, frankly, because it is a business. Above and beyond everything. So I do understand why they think of that way. But yeah, I do think cancel culture affects it in that way. But there is a whole market for conservative stuff. I mean, like the biggest YouTubers out there are all conservatives. Well, not all of them, but a lot of them. Yeah. So that when people say there's no market for conservative filmmaking and no market for conservative opinion in Hollywood, that's not true. And actually, some of my best friends in the industry are very conservative politically, and they're working. Nobody's canceling them or caring that that's their political viewpoint. I think this idea, like I was good friends with a guy who was friends with Stallone, and when Stallone didn't win the Academy Award for Creed, his friend, the late actor Frank Pesh, who was my neighbor, came up to me, and Frank's classic. He was a classic Italian guy, and he's like, "They don't like me and Stallone because we're conservative. We were Republican, so they took the Academy Award away from them." And I was like, "Frank, Stallone should have won for Creed. I agree. I don't think it was anything to do with him being a Republican. It's just whatever. It was just the Academy not giving it to the guy who deserved it. They haven't given it to a ton of liberals who don't deserve it." So, I don't think it's a conspiracy, but I do think it affects the calculation. And like I said, mainly because people don't want to get criticized. So it affects their decision making.
Yeah, I mean, like there's nothing you can't get away from it. Like what we do. Yes, we're supposed to make money, but like it's still entertainment, and art is subjective, People they criticize things, and you can't get away from it. It's just I guess people need a little bit more of a backbone and not being scared of getting the cancel culture thing, because I mean, who cares about Twitter? I mean, there's a bunch of dorks behind your phone.
Well,
I wouldn't lose sleep over it.
Well, and you look at something like the Dave Chappelle thing, right? Supposedly he's canceled. He's more popular than ever. Nobody really went with that, and I do understand why the transgender community was upset. I respect it. I don't agree with them necessarily, having watched his special. Yeah. I'm not transgender, so I mean, I'm talking as a person who's not being victimized in that role. But I think Dave's funny, and I do think he was trying to make a point. But he didn't lose anything out of that. There was, for all the hubbub, he's fine. He's totally fine. And I think most people on his level are fine. I think where you see it like Bill Burr, right? It's Burr, like, he's probably number one on, the cancel list, considering his comedy. But he's doing fine. He's huge. I do think when you're that big, you're fine. You're insulated. I think when you get to a smaller level, and I'm talking about small level, like you could be a college professor, or you're a very small, doing some role where you're very small, you don't have that kind. That's when cancel culture may affect you, and you may get called out for something that people don't like. And it happens more at universities than any place else. There's a very outspoken conservative professor who may get attacked, and I think that that's wrong. I don't think somebody should be fired or excommunicate. It does happen. I'd say it never happens. People say it never happens are wrong. And I'm a liberal. I know it happens. I was almost canceled. I was sort of semi-canceled as a student. hitting people, and I knew I was going to get a lot of crap for the stuff I was doing. So it does happen, but not with big people. And I don't think it really changes the dynamic. I think the people who get canceled are people who commit crimes, frankly, on that level. You're Kevin Spacey or you're Harvey Weinstein. Yeah, you're canceled, but you're a criminal. And as you should be canceled
and arrested.
Yeah, you're terrible. You're a horrible human being. Yeah, nobody should watch your movies. You're horrible. Although, it's a shame that House of Cards.
No, for real. I totally agree with you, man. Because it was so good, House of Cards, and then when he was out, so I'm like, God damn it. Oh my, maybe in another parallel universe they would have wrapped it up nicely, but this is what we have.
Just been a dick, or come out a year later.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, they should have at least waited for another year, because what we had at the end, final season, it was just kind of they just threw it out there. I hope this works because this is what you guys are gonna get.
Yeah, they just had to just kind of just give up on it, and that's. I mean, not that Kevin Spacey deserves our sympathy. I mean, I knew he was. By the way, it was not a secret he was that way. Yeah. When I was still in film school, I was dating. Well, I just graduated, and I just left, and I was invited. I was dating a set decorator at the time that was working on The Usual Suspects. She told me back then all his antics. It was known to the whole crew of that movie what he was doing. It caused a friction between him and Bryan Singer, who's no saint either. But even for Bryan Singer's taste, it was too much. It was an open secret. He was horrible in that. Just everybody knew Harvey Weinstein was that way. When they all come out now saying, "I had no idea,"
it's yes, you did.
God, I knew that, and I never even met the guy. It was I would never send a female friend of mine into Miramax for a meeting with him alone. Yeah. Come on, it was
chaperone.
But those deserve to have their asses kicked. I don't think that people on the level of Brad Pitt, big A-list stars, they don't get canceled. It's not true. They don't. As long as they're making money for people, they're fine. And I don't think the public really goes along with a lot of these things either. The way that people on Twitter may go off about it, but again, the movie comes out and people forget that stuff, and they just move on. And most people aren't really that into the cancel culture. It's a very smaller segment, I think, of our society that basically thinks people shouldn't be on TV or the movies if they have conservative points of view, or and again, there's a difference between conservative point of view and committing a crime. Those are two very separate things. And I don't think having a political point of view that's conservative is canceling, for big stars and big directors and big writers. It's not. Committing crimes is and should be.
Yeah. Well, absolutely, man. And I also I noticed because in June you were asked from the LA County Library to do a lecture about LGBT comic books and their creators. And I should know about it because I'm as part of my community, but I don't know. But I was wondering. I wanted to ask you, can you share a little bit of what you spoke about that day about the influences of LGBT comics and their creators of what you spoke about?
It was fantastic to get invited to do that because I had to do a lot of research, into it. And I'm not a member of that community, so it was enlightening to me. I thought I knew a lot, but I didn't. And so it was, I knew, and it was great because there's some members of that community who I've worked with at Comic-Cons for years. People like Ed Lucy, who does the Big Wuthable Oath, which is one of the funnier, books. And it's about his dating life and funny and his obsession with cats. He's a great independent comic book guy. His books come out on Fantagraph Books. So there's people like that I had the opportunity to talk about. But the summation of my lecture, the influence of people, from the from the gay community. Yeah. Please forgive me. For some reason, I've always had this thing of not being able to get those letters out of my mouth cleanly. So I'm just
it's okay. Sometimes I trip out at the very end.
I always blow it around the cue. And so I'm just going to say the gay community, even though that's a little too
I'm okay with that.
What we're talking about. But really what I talked about in the lecture was, number one, the history. That's from the time the comics were created. Members of the gay community were key creators and part of the industry. But what happened was, when the book The Seduction of the Innocent came out, which was, came out in the 1950s, the writer of the book, Dr. Wardhead, came out very strongly against, and again, he was not the most progressive guy. So he came out saying the comics were basically causing kids to become gay. And he picked out Batman and Wonder Woman. It's in his book. I'm not making this up. It's in the book. He basically says Batman is turning kids gay. and Wonder Woman is turning women into lesbians. And we need to get kids away from this. And so they had the Comics Code come out, and the Comic Authority basically banned any mention of gay characters in comics for 50 years, which is crazy, but it's true. If you wrote a gay character in a comic, you cannot have it on a newsstand. It would be stopped. And all the major publishers, Marvel and DC, which were the two major publishers, went along with this for almost 50 years. So characters were hinted at being gay. I mean, there was like the character of, in Terry and the Pirates, there was a woman character in that character. Most people, her name is Sanjak, and she was actually an Asian woman who actually tried to seduce Terry's girlfriend dressed as a man. And somehow that got under the censorship. I guess she was grandfathered in. But they straightened her up. She became a femme fatale, not a gay femme fatale. And Batman, that's why, Batman was given, Batwoman, as a love interest. And that's why they gave, Wonder Woman, who was actually based on a gay character, a bisexual woman who was involved with the creator. That's where they got the idea for the, for the comic, was from a bisexual woman who was in was a menage a trois relationship with the two people, the Mortons, who created it. They based it on her. Her name was Olive Byrne. And so, but they kind of, not that they made the character Wonder Woman originally gay, but because Wordham said that it was a bad influence, all of a sudden they gave her a boyfriend, and then they started hooking her up with first Superman and then Batman and whoever else they could make. And they did the same thing with, Batman too. They, in the original Batman, he used to sleep in the same bed with Robin. It was
They're just buddies.
They were just buddies, but it wasn't treated like they were gay. It was just treated like, oh, he's his ward. Of course, they sleep in the same bed. But of course, the imagery of that was just blowing people's minds in the 50s. So then, they slept in separate rooms. They gave Robin Batgirl. And then they started, and oh, by the way, people forget this. Catwoman was too much. People think that, they gave him Catwoman because no, Catwoman was a criminal. So according to the code, Batman could not be with Catwoman because she was a criminal. So they wrote her out of the series for 10 years. But it took almost until the 1960s when they started doing the Batman, where it was like the campy version. To his credit, Adam West and Burt Ward were well aware of the history of Batman, and they played up the gay humor. Nod. We're coming up the building together, hunched over each other, and there's a lot of innuendos in there that and that sort of started to break the mold. But it was really when you get into the 90s, and especially the influence of underground comics, like people like R. Crumb, putting out things like that, where they really got into the issues. And the fact that you could read an underground comic that you could buy from a head shop, which would talk about all that stuff, and that's when the Comics Code started following society more and changing. And as we became more progressive and saying, gay marriage is okay, why are we treating people this way? Yeah. That's when you started seeing the Comic Code. But it really didn't officially end until, I believe the year was 1997, when it was officially removed from the Comics Code that you cannot have gay characters. And shortly after that, North Star, the Marvel character, he was gay. He finally came out as gay after that. Eric Kyle, who had been in the series forever as the friend, But, it took a long time, and it's shocking. And now we're dealing with a backlash, too, which is sad, because you've had all these wonderful things like, Alison Bechdel's, Fun Home, which won the Tony. Not only was it a great graphic novel, but it won the Tony as a musical play. And it's brilliant. It's about her growing up, being gay, but then her dad being closeted and him eventually committing suicide because of it. And it's a very intense, you have all these wonderful books that have talked about these issues and explored them. And you have comic book companies like Prism, which have given a voice to so many people from that community to publish and to do things. And manga has been way ahead for years. I mean, you have things like Pocahontas, which was about a gay relationship that came out in the 1970s. You had all this finally come out and people read it. And now we're dealing with this crazy backlash of Comicsgate, where people are actually saying, same like the film industry, claiming that comics are too woke and there's a conspiracy. And
they're called groomers, right? Because I was going to say, it sounds like they were scared of groomers back in the 60s.
And you're doing all this alternate universe stuff. How dare you make it, how dare you make Jane, dress up like Thor? We're against the Thor movie because of it. This whole videos on YouTube are on. And comic book stores have been vandalized because they're too woke. Yeah. It's just ridiculous. I mean, it's not pretty. If you don't want to read a comic by a gay writer, which why you wouldn't want to do that, I don't know. But if you don't read that, then don't read it. There's no gun being held to your head saying you have to read it. You have to read it.
No, for
You
reals.
don't have to. It's so
I mean,
silly.
like, I grew up. I mean, mostly like heterosexual relationships everywhere, and
Right.
I turned out gay. I'm like, I don't see like people are freaking out. Like, I saw today that a parent was upset because there was a gay character in the Jurassic Park animated series. And I'm like, well, I mean, like I grew up watching, hetero relationships like in cartoons, and look at the way I turned out. I
Did you
don't
become
like the people
straight?
are just flipping out. People are just flipping out. I'm like, dude, just relax. I'm like, this is it's still a cartoon. They still need a love interest. They're just, it's the year 2022. People should just relax.
We're going through a very difficult period as a country where I just think there's a lot of changes,
Yeah,
and people aren't ready for those changes, and that's why you're seeing a backlash. That's why you had Gamergate, which really preceded all this too. With video games are too woke, and it got really vicious and angry against feminists. Who really had nothing to do with the debate. Nobody cared. Nobody was listening to some of these feminist writers until Gamergate pointed them out and started doxing them. And I was like, I'd never heard of half these people that they were mad about. I was like, oh, okay, well maybe I should read them. But yeah, it's silly because the notion that a comic or reading that North Star, is gay, and on the cover of X-Men he marries Kyle, is going to turn kids gay. We're going back to
it's
Dr.
ridiculous.
Warfam stuff. It's just silly. That's not the
Yeah,
way it works.
exactly.
People don't become gay from reading books or comics. That's something that's part of who they are, and it's going to express itself sooner or later.
Yeah,
And
it's
what the society is accept people for who they are and the beauty of who they are, not try to get all bent out of shape because they're different than us. It's silly.
Do you what do you think is the future of the comic book world? Do you think it's just going to get more diverse, or it's going to become conservative? Like, we're in your opinion, do you think it's still like limitless of where the comic, like the graphic medium, is going?
Yeah, I think it's going to reflect society, and I think our society is going through a lot of changes, and you see it, right? Comics were originally, gay people were closeted. There weren't many minority characters who were main characters in comics, and that reflected the societal attitude about comics, and even people who worked behind the scenes. And again, even if you worked at a comic, company like Marvel or these, they weren't the most diverse companies to work for either. They were basically white men working there. There were some great exceptions, but but it was mainly that. And as society has changed, the people working behind comics have become more diverse and from other communities, and then you see the characters changing. And I think as a society in general, we're becoming more multicultural. And we are, despite all the pushback, we are becoming, I think, more accepting. I think we're going through a very big pushback, which was to be expected, that society has changed very quickly. And I think I think a lot of people aren't ready for that change. They want to make America great again, or go back to some throwback thing where people who are different are in the closet or just to the side, and they're expressing this as it's too woke. But I think it's just not really wanting to accept that the world you grew up in as a kid is different. It was always that way, right? It wasn't like there weren't gay people or minorities around.
Yeah, it was just tucked away. You know what I mean? Like on the down low. You had your wife, and you had your little.
You didn't have to think about it, and so I think comics will continue. I don't think they're going to become more conservative. I think they're going to continue to reflect society's greater acceptance of this. I think this battle over making America great again is going to fail. Mm-hmm. I think even if you're conservative politically, I think that I have faith in humanity, that even conservative people ultimately want to accept other people.
It's just like the counterculture.
Arrive at that point where they can be a little less militant about, we don't like this, we don't need gay books in school. Eventually they'll get over it. It may take 20 years. But they'll eventually realize that that's the way society is, and
it's just very odd, man. And what are you working on right now? Like, what graphic novel are you working on right now? I know, like I read your comic book Nancy and the Black Widow. It's like how's everything? Like, are you creating more? Are you creating more graphic novels? Are you working on a short film or anything like that? What are you working on right now, man?
Oh yeah, working on a lot of stuff in the world of comics. We got a comic we started a couple years ago. We got a little distracted because I got hired to write a very big project for some really neat German environmentalists. But we're gonna get back into it. It's a vampire western called Rio Sangre, where there's this poor town in the Old West is being attacked by this sort of army of bandits. It's a little bit like the Seven Samurai, except it's in the Old West, and they can't get anybody to defend the town, so they finally decide to hire some vampires by playing them in blood. Nice. There's a lot of twists to it, but we did the first 2 issues. It sold really well at Comic-Con and other shows I did this year. So we're going to finish the book. We already talked to the artist, so we're going to finish that and get it going as a complete graphic novel as well as single issues. I'm actually going into business with some really great guys. They're USC students, and they came to me with a comic that I really love. It's almost like Animal Kingdom. It's about drug dealing in LA. And it's done in this really fresh, kind of really interesting style. Like they didn't do it all dark and heavy. It's very colorful and very cartoony looking. It's very heavy. I told them, I was like, I can't bring this to schools. I do a lot of school shows. Like, unless they're in the 12th grade, I can't.
I'll get canceled.
So we're making a deal with those guys to do their book and publish it with Diablo comics. So those are two of the big things we're doing. In the world of film, I'm doing a lot of stuff. We're actually in discussions with MGM and Amazon Studios because Amazon bought MGM, so they want to do Biodome 2. So
yes, I actually wanted to ask you. Like, I know because like you're just the writer, and sometimes the writers just get pushed aside. You know what I mean? If I wanted to ask you, if like are they talking to you to write the sequel to Biodome?
Well, yes, because lucky for me in my contract, they have to. So at very least, they have to hire me as a producer. They don't have to hire me as a writer contractually, but they have to hire me as a producer. But I have been in talks. I talked to Polly. I talked to the producer, Becca Boy. So we'll see how it all pans out. I do have a lot of ideas and story things I've mapped out.
That's so fucking cool, man. That's really cool.
We need the green light. MGM has to. If they green light it, then we'll get to that next phase, and hopefully I get hired. To write this. I'd like to do it. If I don't, that's fine. I'll contribute as a producer and make sure that it gets done and it's funny. And that's already baked in because I talked to everybody and we're all on the same page with that. But yeah, it'd be fun to write the screenplay again. It's been a while, but it would be fun. It's funny. I talked to this guy, through a friend of my family's, and I was mentioning that, this thing about Biodome 2 may be happening. The guy contacted me through my family member, and he's like, dude, I'm going to do, he cultivates marijuana. So he's like, I'm going to do a Bud and Doyle special sticky punch, total killer bud for Biodome. If you do it, we're all over it, dude. I'm like, oh God. Don't get too excited yet. That's great to know. Great to know. We'll keep that in mind. The Biodome brand of weed that we'll sell it on.
People will buy it.
I'm sure they will. Buy it. I told Brad Cavoy, I said, I'll get free samples for all you guys at your office. He was like, yes.
I saw Biodome in the movie theater with my folks.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I was like, when I found that out, I was like, oh, that's so cool, man. Because like, I think I was maybe like in the 6th grade. I saw it with my parents and like in the theater, and that part where like they were dancing. Do you think you dance? And like the little midget guy was coming in the came out. My mom, she leaned in to me like in the movie theater. She's like, because she's a boomer. She's like, what is that supposed to mean? I don't know. Like, because I already knew it was from the music video. And it was kind of hard to explain with her, like in the movie, playing that's just like a memory that I remember.
It's really funny, Christian. My dad did the same thing. He was like, he's from Trinidad, so he speaks with an accent. He's like, he turns to me at the premiere. He's like, boy, who is this midget? What does that have to do with anything? And I'm like, I'll tell you later. I'll tell you later. Oh, I want to know. And I'm like, Dad, I can't explain it right now. It's too long of a story.
That's crazy that we have the same experience with our folks. Well, another
so we're
thing
doing that, and I'm actually developing a television show right now with a great friend of mine, Remy Carter. It's going to be a horror thing, and we're developing it right now. I don't want to give away too many details, but it's going to be great. We might actually be working with some of my comic properties and breaking them up into 4-part stories. So when you watch the TV show, it's going to be 4 parts, and then the horror story comes to an end. So like they're like mini little series in the series. So we're developing that. I actually wrote an independent film for a director named Daniel Andre, which is actually, they just wrapped it up in LA. It's called Morton Sherman Oaks, which is pretty funny. It's a cool little like indie film I wrote for him. So they're in post production now on that. It stars Lucy Hale. Cool. So I'm very busy. I'm actually working almost nonstop as a writer. When I'm not doing comics, I'm pretty much writing a script for somebody. So I'm very busy with all that, and and while I'm doing that, I'm running around, trying to get my projects going. There's this one project I wrote for Disney many years ago that I've wanted to get made for a long, long time. It's a skateboard project about these two guys on the last day of summer skating across town to watch their idol shoot a hill. And it's sort of about growing old. It's about being young. It's it's about the world of skateboarding. It's really funny. It's one of the funniest things I've ever wrote. And Disney had it for years, but it was too edgy for Disney. So they were, Disney was, they were nice enough, in a rare case where Disney was nice. They basically said, Scott, you can go out. with it. We'll give you the rights back. As long as you pay us a little bit of money for the fees that we paid you originally, you can go sell it. So we're actually working to set that up, and I'm working with Brad Cavoy to do that. So I'm reaching out to a lot of actors to play the parts. So hopefully we can get that going. That's like a project that's kind of near and dear to my heart because I like skateboarding and I like that world. So we're working very hard to get that one made as well. So, and we're getting close. So, hopefully knock on wood.
I can't wait to hear. Yeah, I can't wait to hear when it actually happens, man. Like, I'll be watching. I always watch your social media stuff, man. I always check it out.
And, so cool. Yeah, if we get it going, I'll let you know for sure.
And what advice would you give somebody who wants to be a writer or a filmmaker? I mean, because you're a creative guy. Like, what advice would you give somebody who's just wants to get into the door? Like,
number one, I would say, is, I started off not being a writer, and I got very lucky. I guess I was lucky because I was a storyteller, right? I was already in film school, but I didn't study screenwriting. In film school, I was studying directing. But I realized very quickly I could do it, and that was probably my stronger talent than directing, was actually writing. So my advice would be, if you want to write, and you want to be in the film industry, is to write a ton. Right? Mm-hmm. Anything, and even if you don't write, you finish the screenplay and you think it's crap, fine. Throw it aside, start a new one. The more you write, the better you're going to get. And the more you're going to recognize your own mistakes, and things that you could do better. So I would say that's number one. Secondly, it's a tough business. Nobody's there to do you a favor. Only 5% of writers make money at it. Only, 2% of people want to direct, instead of directing, ever direct anything. Yeah. What is it? And it's like something, I think actors have it even worse. I mean, 1% of actors actually get paid or get, so it's a tough business. And the difference between making it and not making it is partly luck. You do need a break, but part of it's also just being determined and not stopping and to keep hammering away at it, and support yourself in some other way, but never give it up as your psychic. If your passion is there, continue to ham away at it. And even my career, it sounds like I've had unlimited success. I haven't. There's been periods of my career where it's really slow. And there's years where things didn't go the way I wanted. And I had to substitute teach for a while. But I never gave up my passion for film. I kept hammering away at it, doing things I wanted to do until it got better again. Right. And that's the film business. There's that rare breed of people who become Brad Pitt. Or, or just have unlimited, everything they write gets bought for millions of dollars. There are those people. But that's not most people. And if you want to make it, you have to have a thick skin. Don't take criticism personally. Everybody's going to tell you that, especially if you haven't sold something that's made a lot of money before, they're going to tell you that whatever you wrote or whatever you did is crap. That's just the way human nature. Don't take it personal. They're just saying whatever. If there's something you can get out of that that's valuable, you don't take everybody's criticism seriously. People talk shit. So just take what you can get from it. And if it's useful to you and you agree with it, use it. Use it to make yourself stronger. It's like a muscle. It gets stronger from getting a little torn. Your heart might get a little broken if people don't like your stuff, but you'll get stronger. And don't give up. If your heart's truly in it and you want to be in that 5% of people who make it, then you cannot give up. The only person who will ever defeat you is you. I mean, there is true that maybe you have no talent. And I'm not going to lie. But some people just have no effing talent. We've all seen, what's that movie that came out with that dude, The Room?
I was just thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah, those people
it was
no
so
talent.
Terrible. It was good. It was so terrible. It was good, and they made it into a movie.
There's Ed Woods out there. There's people who the best thing you're ever going to do is Plan 9 from outer space. But most people have a little bit of talent. Not everybody, but if you do, and you recognize this about yourself, and you show people some of your stuff, and you have a good enough eye that you can spot that what you're doing is good. It's just not getting in the right hands. Just remember, it's a hell of a tough business, and it's one of the few art forms which requires an immense amount of capital to do it. You could go be a mime and go put your cup down it. No one's stopping you. If you want to make a movie, you better have $600,000. That's a big impediment to most people. Yeah. So you have to realize it's a money business. It's hard, and you have to have a thick skin and be very hard and work very hard and very determined to make it. But you can. It's not impossible to make it. Anybody who tells you you'll never make it, no, you can make it. Try hard. Keep trying. You'll find a way to do it.
The endurance. You just got to have endurance, right?
It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. I know a lot of cats who sold scripts right out of film school. They don't write it anymore. They're doing something else. It's a marathon. Just because you sold one great script and people like it, and you made a little bit of money at it, doesn't mean you have a career. But the people who do have careers are people who stick with it and don't give up and don't take no for an answer. You might have to call 200 people before you find one who wants your script and wants to finance it. Well, make those 200 calls. Send that script to 200 places. It's what it's
Do you
going to
think
take.
there's a age limit to pursuing your dreams? Like, being a successful writer or director, like, is there like, you could, you know what I mean? Cause somebody is like, I'm going to be in my 40s about like in a year or two. And I'm still, I'm still pursuing, I'm still writing, I'm still creating stuff, but I wish it was, I wish I already would like at least directed a TV show or something,
Well, there is age discrimination, so you have to recognize that does go on. If you're right out of film school and you're young and fresh, yes, people will probably be more into you, especially since the development person you're talking to is probably in their late 20s, early 30s, because that's the level that they're at in their career. They're going to relate to you a lot more than somebody who's walking in, 70-year-old, saying, "Hey, this is my first script." There is that, and I'm not going to lie and say there's not age discrimination, but you can fight through it. And even as an actor, whatever you do, it's easier as a writer because they don't see you, right? Mm-hmm. Unless you take a meeting, they haven't seen you, and hopefully by the time they take the meeting, they've fallen in love with your script. There's no requirement to put your age on the front cover of your script when you send it in. It's just your script, and if it's good and it gets to that point that people want to make it, you're fine. Go to the meeting, and if they're into it, you can do it. They're not going to suddenly throw your script on the ground and say, "I'm out. Yeah. You're over the age of 50. I'm out." If they like it, they like it. And so, from that perspective, as a writer, you have it a little easier. It's a little harder for actors, but it's not impossible. Even, think of all the great actors you can think of who you didn't even notice until they were in their 50s. Morgan Freeman, Anthony Hopkins, Ian McKellen. I mean, they were working, but they didn't become superstars till they were well into their later years. That's when they got a few wrinkles. All of a sudden, it's like, wow,
true.
Really good. Where did you come from?
You look more distinguished.
The great story, is like Cheryl, who played Larry David's wife on his show. She was basically broke. She'd been acting for years. Nobody cared about her. It's this great, brilliant comedic actress. She was wonderful. And Larry David gave her a break. She was basically, she tells the story, I think, that she was at County USC Medical Center for some minor thing, and she couldn't afford the treatment. When she got the call from Larry David, you're on your show, and she became, a household name. Now everybody knows her, Yeah. So if you keep at it, you will I like to believe you will eventually get your break. I mean, I can't guarantee that will happen for everybody. I don't think there's an age limit. I think the barriers get harder, and you have to know that. And you have to try to steer through that, and fight through that kind of stuff. But no, you could direct a film, your first film at age 60, age 70. If it's good, people will see it, and you have to believe that. And I think that is true. And you can make it at a later age. There is no barrier where you suddenly can't write once you get to a certain age, and sometimes it takes that long to get people to really, if you have success early and you start building up a big resume, it's a hell of a lot easier because you can point to all those things you did and say, now that's why you should hire me and make this. It's easier. If you're coming in and you've never sold anything, it's harder. But that's harder for a 20-year-old too. It's not, the more stuff you can put on that resume that make you seem legitimate, the more people are going to give you a chance, But it's not insurmountable.
Well, that was all great advice, man. Like, this was an awesome conversation,
Oh, cool, Christian.
And is there, like, where can people find you? Where can people follow you? Where can they, click like and subscribe?
You can always find me. I'm hard to miss. I'm on all the social media, so you can find me either under my name, Scott Marcano, or a lot of my stuff on social media is under Diablo Comics because I do so much with Diablo Comics. So I'm Diablo Comics on Facebook. I'm Diablo Comics on Instagram. I'm Diablo Comics on Twitter. You can find me at my website. If you ever want to contact me, go to my website, diablocomics.com, and go to the Contact Us thing and write it. Now, whoever reads that, it's not always me. Sometimes, I do have interns and people who sometimes read our emails, but they'll show it to me. If you say, hey, make sure Scott Marcano or Diablo, sees this, I'll see it and I will respond. I'm very good at responding to people. And if you go to YouTube, my YouTube channel is actually the one thing that's under my real name. It's under Scott Marcano. You can watch my YouTube channel and see all our cool videos. We actually do cartoons of a lot of our graphic novels, and they're really fun. So if you go to our YouTube channel, like and subscribe. That's my like and subscribe. Go there, you can find us there. So and also my agent and my contact information, not my direct contact information, but my agent's information is all on IMDb. So you ever need to get in touch with me, you can always contact my crotchety agent, Lloyd Robinson. Yeah, he'll call, why are people writing me, Scott? He'll let me know you wrote. But it's easy just to write me through like Diablo Comics, or like I said, on you can find me on Facebook if you're really a dedicated fan. And I do have this occasionally, like my own super fans who write me on Facebook will say, like, Scott, can I friend with you on Facebook? I'm sure.
Sure, buddy. Yeah.
Sure, no problem. Just don't post, weird photos on my timeline, and we're all good.
Yeah. Well, Scott, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a good weekend, man. And I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Hey, it's been my pleasure. I really appreciate you having me on your show, Christian. You're a great guy. We've known each other for a while. God,
yeah. Touching base over here. It has, man. Oh my geez. Hope to hang out with you someday. I hope when I do start going to the Comic Cons again, I'll stop by your booth and we'll take a picture together.
Please do. I'm in LA frequently. Well, not that frequently, but I do go to LA for meetings, and for involving film projects. And I'm at WonderCon, I'm at Comic Con, and other shows. So please do look me up. I'd love to talk to you. Even if you just want to, if you think a show's coming up and you just want to hang and have a cup of coffee. I don't really drink beer that much anymore. I'm a boring old man these days, but I'm always looking for a cup of coffee. So give me a holler, and we can hang out. Great.
We'll drink some latte together. All right, guys. Well, that's our show. I mean, I want to thank Emmanuel Alvarado for setting all this up. If you guys want to produce your own podcast, please hit him up at Livestream My Event. He'll set you up in the same manner. And also, if you haven't already, please follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify so we can help. You can help us grow our community. So that is our show, guys. I'll see you guys for our midweek update, and I'll let you know when we have another episode of Casually Christian. So have a good weekend, stay safe, and have a good night. Bye, guys. Thank you.